Hi guys, and welcome to the Magic of Programming channel. On this channel, I will try to teach you real-world programming skills which you can then apply in your own personal life. But before we begin, you may be wondering, why should you learn programming in the first place? There are actually many valid answers to that question. For example, one answer might be that in the future you may want to obtain a high-paying and prestigious job, such as a software engineer or web developer. And in order to have those jobs, you'll of course need a high level of programming skills. Another reason might be that you just wish to obtain a really cool skill that you can use to impress your friends and family, or in order to pursue some kind of personal passion project, such as developing your own video game. Another reason might be that if you have a certain type of job, having programming skills can help you make that job a lot easier. For example, if you work in an office, chances are that you have to do a lot of repetitive, boring tasks, such as doing data entry, sending a bunch of repetitive emails, or working with spreadsheets, for example. And as it happens, programming skills can enable you to automate a lot of that repetitive work away, which is one of the topics that we'll cover later on in this channel. Also, if you're a scientist or an engineer, programming skills can help you write programs which will enable to do some of your work more effectively or just to do it at all. So now that we see some of these reasons for why learning programming can be very useful, let me also mention that in this channel, we're going to be using the Python programming language. And the reason for that is that one, Python is actually a very mature language since it started all the way back in 1989. And also it's a very popular language. Whenever they do any kind of an online poll, Python is usually either number one or number two in terms of popularity. Now, being both very popular and very mature gives it certain advantages over other languages. For example, there are a lot of, and I do mean a huge amount of third-party libraries available for Python that do all sorts of useful work. So whenever you're writing a Python program, there's a very good chance that you can use some other person's third-party library, with their permission, of course, in order to make your job a lot easier and faster. Also, because Python is so popular and has been around for such a long time, it means there are a lot of online resources available for it. So if you're ever stuck with some kind of Python programming problem, there's a very good chance that you should be able to very easily Google the solution to that problem just because there's so many people posting online about Python. Another reason why we chose Python is because it's also a very fun and elegant language to work with. And by that, what I mean is Python is a very high level language. So instead of usually thinking in terms of underlying machine implementation of your computer, when you work with Python, you're very free to concentrate on the business problem at hand. And as you will learn later, that actually frees you up to be a lot more efficient and to be able to work a lot faster. So now that we've gone over that, the next step is we're actually going to install our development environment, including Python itself, and you'll see how easy it is to install everything and to run your very first program. So in order to install Python on your computer, just go to whatever browser you use and Google Python. And one of the first search results that's going to come up will say something like welcome to python.org. So that's where you want to go, or if you want, you can click on the downloads link right away. And they will give you an option at the top of this Python website to download the latest version of Python for Windows, or they'll detect whatever computer you're using. There's a button, download Python 3.13, which is currently the latest version. So we're going to click on that. And because they detected which operating system you use, or generally they do, you'll see that they immediately downloaded the Windows version of latest Python for the 64-bit operating system, which is exactly what we're going to use. So once you download this, just double click on the download and you'll get this option to install the latest version of Python for your computer. You can use either of these options, but if you prefer, you could, I guess in the beginning, it might be easier for you to use the very first one. And one thing I do want you to do though, is to click off both of these boxes if possible, because this one will make it easier for you to work with Python in terms of permissions. And this one will basically add Python to path, which means that it'll be easy for your computer to find the Python installation in different directories on your computer, which will come in very handy. So once you select these two, you can just click install now. And basically you give it permission, and it's going to install the latest version of Python on your computer. So you just wait for this process to complete. Shouldn't take too long. And once it's done, it'll tell you setup was successful and you can close this window. Now, what you want to do after that is there's something else that we're going to be using quite a bit, and it's called the command line. And in Windows, in order to bring up the command line, you just go to your search box and you type in CMD. And it's going to bring up this command prompt option, and you just click on that. And clicking it will bring up this command line window. And this will just give us an easy way to interact with Python programs directly. But for now, we just want to make sure that Python was installed successfully. And in order to do that, on the command line, you just type in something like this, Python space -- version. If Python was installed successfully, this should show you the latest version of Python on your computer. Whereas if it gives you some kind of an error message, that means the installation did not go through successfully. So let's hit enter. And you'll see that it showed me right here Python 3.13, which is the latest version that we just downloaded. So that means the installation went through successfully. And we can now run Python commands on our computer. The next step, after we've installed Python and used CMD, is we want to have some kind of development code editor for Python. Now, you're free to use whichever one you prefer if you already have a favorite, but for the purposes of this channel, we're going to be using a very popular code editor called VS Studio. So again, if we go back to Google, we can just search for VS Studio. And it's going to be the very first search result that comes up, Visual Studio Code. If you click on this, you can click download for Windows. And it's going to download the software. And again, you can click on it. Select accept. By the way, the software is free, so you don't have to worry about that. And once you click I accept the agreement, you can click next and specify where to install it. You can create a desktop icon, which is pretty useful. Add it to path and click next, and then just click install. And again, this process might take a few seconds, but should be pretty quick. So basically, this is the Visual Studio Code, or VS Code, and what it is, it's a program where you can edit or write Python code. And it comes with a lot of different conveniences, such as it highlights Python code in a way where it's very easy to read, so different things are color-coded and very visible. It also lets you do a ton of other stuff. but you'll see all of that later. So for now, the next step for us is to actually create a working folder on our computer where we're going to keep all these Python files that we're going to be working on. And again, this is very easy. If you just click on your computer structure, you can go to this PC, and you can create something like a new folder, and you can just call it Programming 101. And we're going to use this folder to create all of our files. So, and once you do that, back in Visual Studio VS Code, what you can do is you can click on File, New File, and we're going to create a new file that we call programming101.py because that's the extension for Python programs. And we're going to hit enter. But instead of saving it here, we'll want to save it in the folder that we just created, which we find by going back to our PC and then going to Programming 101. And basically, this creates our Programming101.py file. If you go back to the folder that we created, Programming 101, you can see this file is now in there. And we can write our initial Python program in there. And just to show you how easy it is to write your first Python program, we're going to keep it very simple. And this program, all it will do is basically print out hello world to the console or to the command line window. And all we need to do is a little snippet like this. For now, you don't have to worry too much about the syntax. Let's just say that this whole thing, it just denotes the main function in any Python program, but you don't have to worry about it. Just know for now that this is always going to be the same for any main function. And inside that main function, we just have a single statement, which just says print hello world. And then we're going to save this. To save a Python program after you've changed it, there's a couple of ways. You can click on File and click Save or Save As, or a quicker way is to just do Control S as the sort of hotkey on your keyboard. So pressing Control and the S key together, and that will save your program. So once you do that, you go back to your command line window that we and you hopefully opened earlier. And what we need to do is we need to go in this command line window from whatever folder it starts in to the Programming 101 folder that we created for our projects. And to do that, you use the command cd, which is short for change directory, and then you specify the full path of where you want to go, or the relative path of where you want to go. For now, we can do something like this, C drive, which is where that folder is, and after that, it's just going to be Programming 101. And then you hit enter. And now on the command line, we're inside that folder. And we can do another command called dir, which will list all the files and folders in this directory that we're currently in. So if I hit enter here, you can see that the only file in this directory right now is the Programming101.py, which is this program right here. So once we're there, we can actually run our very first Python program by simply doing this, Python space Programming101.py. By the way, you don't have to type out the whole name of the file usually, or the directory. You just need to type out enough of it that the computer knows which file you're referring to, and then you can use the tab key to autocomplete the rest of the name, just to make life easier. So this basically tells the computer that you want to run the Python interpreter on this file Programming101.py, which is our very first program. And if I hit enter here, you'll see that it just printed hello world here. So congratulations, this is your first Python program. And again, you can do all of this on your computer, and just to follow everything that I did here, it's very simple. And you will have your first working Python program, which doesn't do a lot of useful stuff yet, but you get the idea how easy it is to install everything and make your Python run. Now that we wrote our first program, the next step is to kind of understand the basics of programming syntax. And in a lot of ways, programming is very similar to writing English. Just like when you write something in English language, there are a lot of grammar rules and there are also all kinds of building blocks that you use, right? Like paragraphs, sentences, words, letters, punctuation, and various rules of grammar. In the same way, the same types of things apply to programming, except of course they're somewhat different from the English language as well. So in order for us to learn those, we're going to step away for a bit from VS Code, the code editor, and instead what we're going to do is we're going to bring up our command line again. Now, as you recall, before we ran this command, Python and then Programming 101, in order to run our Programming 101 program. But the other thing that you can do with this, if you delete the name of the program and just keep Python and hit enter, what this is going to do is it's going to open kind of inline Python interpreter where you can run the commands immediately after entering them. And this can be very useful for running short bits of code. Of course, you can't use this to actually write the entire program. For that, you still have to go back to the VS Code editor. But if you're just trying to run or to test a very short bit of code, this can be a much faster way of doing it. So we're going to use this in order to learn some of the basics of how programming syntax works. And one of the first things we're going to learn about is what are called inbuilt data types in Python. And these are types of data that you can work around and play around with in Python that are part of the Python language. One of the very first ones that you learn about is something called a string, or in Python it's actually called str. So a string is just a bit of text which can have any number of characters. So it could be one word, there could be multiple words in a sentence, or it could be, thousands of consecutive letters with spaces or numbers or anything like that. But basically it's just a text string. So in Python, what we can do, we're going to call this test string. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign it some value. And the value is going to be hello world, which we used before. Now, whenever you're dealing with string values, you have to put them in double quotation marks, as you can see here. That tells Python that this is a string literal. So in this case, the string literal is hello world, triple exclamation mark. And this thing on the left side is what we call a variable. So variables in Python, or programming languages in general, are just pieces of computer memory which have a name and which store some piece of information. And the equal sign in this case is an operator that tells Python that we're basically assigning whatever's on the right side of the statement to the variable that's on the left side. So essentially we're telling Python, please store the string literal hello world under this variable test underscore string. And the reason we use underscore is because that's the typical convention for Python variables. Whenever you define Python variables, you want them to be all in lowercase and with underscores separating different words. So once again, we're just telling Python that we want to store hello world as part of this test string variable. So if we hit enter, that's exactly what Python does. And now what happens is if I just type in test string and hit enter, you see that Python tells me hello world right here. So Python already associates this literal with this variable, and that means I can now use in my code test underscore string as instead of the actual literal variable. Now the reason you might want to do that is because that lets you do all kinds of operations on a variable which might change as your program runs. So for example, in the beginning of your program you might assign it hello world, but later as your program runs it might be assigned some different string dynamically, and later on at whatever point of your program's lifetime, you just want to work with whatever string it's currently pointed at. So one thing that we can do, for example, that's pretty cool, is we can say test underscore string equals test underscore string plus So basically, what did we do here? We basically told Python that we're going to take whatever's on the right side of the assignment as designated by the equal sign and assign it to this variable again. But as you recall from our previous command, we already assigned the hello world string literal to this. So now we're basically telling it take the current value of test string, which is hello world, and then concatenate as designated by this plus sign. So whenever you use a plus sign with strings, they basically concatenate the strings together. So we're asking Python to concatenate the hello world to this new string literal, which is space and goodbye. So now if I run test_string again and hit enter, you will see the new string is hello world space and goodbye, because those two strings were added because that's what we asked Python to do. Now, don't worry too much about how all these operators work, because we're going to go over them in more detail later on. But for now, I just wanted to show you that this is how these string inbuilt data types work in Python. Basically, they just contain some kind of a text string. Now, another inbuilt data type is something called int, which stands for integer, which in Python just means whole numbers. So for example, and again, we're going to use a variable called number, and we're going to assign it the number 5. So now if I run this variable, Python will tell me its value is 5. And this is an int. Now, if I wanted to do a little bit of arithmetic, I could do something like this. Number equals number minus 2. And if I run number now, as expected, it gives me 3, because when I ran this command right here, it took the previous value of number, which is 5, and subtracted 2 from it, and stored what was left, which is 3, under the variable number. So this is how the int or integers work. Another inbuilt data type is something called float, which stands for essentially decimal numbers with a decimal point. So let's create a variable called decimal number, and we're going to assign it the value 3.12. If we run it again, it'll tell us it's 3.12, and we can do something like this: decimal number. The / in Python is an operator that denotes division, so I'm basically telling it to divide, and I will say divide by 3, and if I hit enter here, the result is 1.04, which is 3.12 divided by 3. So this is the float inbuilt data type. Another inbuilt data type is something called a bool, which is short for Boolean, which you guys probably recall from school. So a Boolean can have one of two values, which is either true or false, and it's part of Boolean logic. So in Python, we can have a variable called something like this. And we can assign it the value true. And then if we hit enter, it'll show us true. And the other value also is false for Boolean. And again, if we run it, it's going to show us false. These are very useful for any kind of logical checks, as we will see later once we're writing more complex programs. Another really important inbuilt data type in Python is something called a list. And a list is essentially a list of elements, which could be any other type of data type, right? So for example, it could be a list of ints, or a list of whole numbers, or it could be a list of floats, list of decimal numbers, it could be a list of strings, it could be a list of booleans, or later on, as we'll see, it could be a list of classes, which we'll cover in more detail later on. But basically, it's just a list of some elements which we can work with in Python. And a list can be displayed like this. We can call it sum_list, and we can use brackets. And if it's empty brackets, they're essentially telling Python this is an empty list. It doesn't have any elements in it. So if we check it, you can see it's just an empty list. But if it does have some elements in it, then we want to put those elements inside the brackets. So for example, if our list is a list of numbers, we can just do something like this. And in this case, we assigned to the variable SUMList a list of 4 elements, each of which is an int or whole number. And again, if we check it now, we see that it has a list of those 4 elements, and we can do various things for it. Like for example, we're going to cover the for loops a little bit later on, but for now I'll just show you. We can go through this SUMList and do something like this. So in this case, we're just going in a loop through this SUMList and printing each element in it, which is just one of these 4 numbers. So lists, of course, are very useful because a lot of real-world problems have some kind of a list. Like, for example, you could be working with a list of cells in an Excel spreadsheet, or you could be working with some list of numbers from real-world data, or various other types of lists. So as you can imagine, it's a very useful data type. And the final inbuilt data type in Python that we're going to talk about today is something called a dictionary, or a dict. A dictionary is basically, if you think about a real world dictionary, it's a list of words, and for each word it has the definition of that word. So you can think of it as the word being the key and the definition of the word being the value. So in Python, dictionaries consist of a bunch of keys, and each key refers to some value within the dictionary, which can be accessed via the key. So for example, let's say we have several people and we want to store their names as the key to the dictionary and their ages as the values in the dictionary. So that way we can easily look up anybody's age via their name. So the way to do this in Python is we're going to call it an age dictionary, age dict. And dictionaries are defined with curly brackets. So if we do empty curly brackets, that means it's an empty dictionary without any keys or values. But in this case, we do want to put those people's names and ages inside the dictionary. So let's say we'll do something like this. So this tells the dictionary that there's going to be a key with the name Angela and the value of int 40. And then also there'll be a key named John with the value 35 and a key named Peter with the value 21, and finally a key named Judy with the value 15. So if we hit enter, we can now look up this age dict, and if we hit enter, it'll show you all these keys and values. But the more useful functionality is now we can use this dictionary to look up the age of any of these people. So for example, let's say somewhere in my code, I wanted to look up Peter's age. All I have to do is do age dict, and then in brackets, put in the value of the key, which in this case is Peter. And then if I hit enter, it will give me the value 21, which is exactly how we created the dictionary. So basically doing the name of the dictionary and then in brackets the key, it'll return the value. And this is a very useful way to store information in Python. So now we've gone over all the basic inbuilt data types: ints, strings, floats, booleans, lists, and dictionaries. And these are the basic data types that you can use to write Python programs. And the other major data type is not the inbuilt one, but it's the custom defined one called a class. And of course, that's something that we're going to discuss later in much more detail. So at this point, we've covered the basics of installing our work environment, how to work with Python, running the first Python program, and the inbuilt data types. So I think that's a fair amount of content to absorb in the beginning, and I think that's where we're going to end the first video. And of course, we'll continue with future videos as we go deeper into Python syntax and how we can start writing more complex and interesting programs. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up or like, please subscribe, and please come back for future videos. Thank you very much.